Good day and welcome everybody. I'm very delighted to welcome all of you. First of all, those who have joined us in a Zoom meeting, but also those who are now watching the live stream on YouTube, as well as Facebook. This event is the first event in cooperation between Promote Ukraine and Vox Ukraine, and we decided to dedicate this event to a very timely topic and a discussion regarding local elections in Ukraine. Even though it's about politics and it's about elections, we want this discussion to be evolving around norms, standards, legislation, and how the environment will be helping the voters to make up their mind, and whether this time we can rely on the fairness of the electoral process, or whether actually the introduced changes, which were introduced a little bit more than 3 months before the elections, are going to throw us back to some old practices and quite bad ones. And to welcome everybody, I would want to give floor to Yulia Mincheva on behalf of Vox Ukraine.
Yulia, microphone.
Oh, sorry, it was very uncomfortable. Thank you for joining us and thank you for inviting me. So elections, I guess, is one of the topic which is not in the shadow of COVID, because it's very important and will affect all of our lives for years ahead. Thank you, Promote Ukraine, for this initiative. I think we'll put this fruitful cooperation in action right now. So let's listen to all of prominent speakers right now and what we'll have ahead of us. Thank you.
I'd like to announce that our event will go for 1 hour, will last for 1 hour. The last 20 minutes are reserved for question and answers, and we will be delighted to have them in the chat of Zoom, those who managed to join us through Zoom, or you can also comment in YouTube and Facebook, and I will read them out aloud, and hopefully our speakers will have sufficient time to address all your questions and concerns. In the first 40 minutes, we will actually listen to the speakers both from Brussels, but also from Ukraine, from varying places, regarding, as I said, the legislative changes and what we are to expect. And our first speaker is going to be Anna Nalyvaichenko from Martin Center here in Brussels. And she's going to talk about how to actually, whether these elections are promising to be free and fair, why yes or why not. So Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marina. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure being here with fellow colleagues and experts to discuss local elections in Ukraine. So I will start by giving a broader perspective on the whole electoral process, as I'm sure that the speakers that will come after me are much more qualified and knowledgeable about all the nitty-gritty details of the electoral code. So I will start by saying what I think is important to see here is we have to look in what conditions are these elections being held. And there are 3 issues that we have to look at here. The first one is, of course, the complex new electoral system, which may be unfamiliar to many voters, but also candidates. The second one, and I'm not going in order of importance here, they're all equally important. The second one is, of course, the disruptions that are being caused by the ongoing conflict in Eastern Ukraine. And the third one are, of course, the public health risks which are associated with the coronavirus pandemic. And with regards to the ongoing conflict, we all know that the Central Electoral Commission has decided not to hold elections in the separatist-controlled territories and in 18 communities in the vicinity of the contact line in Donbass. This decision has been also reinforced and reiterated by President Zelensky, who was just visiting Brussels here a few days ago for the EU-Ukraine summit. And even though he confirmed his commitment to the Minsk peace process, he said that there are no prerequisites to hold free and fair elections in the eastern Ukraine, especially the areas which are not under the control of Ukrainian government, even though it was demanded by President Putin. But he stated very clearly that until Ukraine regains full control of external borders, for now, the elections cannot be held. But regardless of this difficult situation, and regardless of the conflict, which also I think it's important to remind that the conflict has been labeled for 6 years now as a frozen conflict, which is not. Ukraine has managed to hold 2 free, fair, and transparent presidential elections in this past 6 years, where the will of the people was reflected. And with that regard, Ukraine set a very high bar, I think, when it comes to a display of democracy, especially for the neighboring countries, which are still struggling with their Soviet past to an extent. And it's imperative that those standards, those transparency standards, are maintained in the local elections as well. We know that the country is still undergoing a decentralization reform, which granted local authorities a degree of autonomy from the central government, also financially speaking. However, the changes in the election code gave a more predominant role to political parties to nominate candidates in local elections, especially in the bigger constituencies. And this will led to 2 things. One of those is that the incumbent mayors, so the ones who are seeking re-election, have to either be nominated by the party, or if they're not belonging to any party and they're independent, they have to form a party of their own to be able to run in the elections. And the second one is, of course, that the presidential party, so the Servant of the People Party, will have a greater opportunity for a larger presence on local councils and therefore in local governance. And unfortunately, we know that Ukraine, because also of its past, has practices of electoral fraud. And while vote buying is not as widespread anymore as it used to be in the past, still there are some practices which relate to bribing voters or paying clone candidates, which are still in place. And I think it's very important that those things will be tackled as soon as possible. And I'm sure that also the international observers will be interested in watching out for those practices. Especially when we look at the geopolitical situation in Eastern neighborhood. And of course, I'm referring to the events in Belarus, the protests that followed the presidential election in August. I believe that it is really vital for Ukraine to continue being the example of this irreversible path to democracy, of which transparent and fair and free elections are the basis. Once again, Zelensky said during the EU-Ukraine summit that indeed Ukraine is not backing from its European path, and I think it's very important to uphold those standards in the elections. Unfortunately, in the past years, corruption has been the buzzword when it comes to Ukraine, and especially on the European level. And indeed, the fight against corruption was also one of the main topics of the main points also of the joint statement following the EU-Ukraine summit. And I think that the EU does not have any expectations when it comes to the results of the local elections, besides the fact that they should reflect indeed the will of the people, but it has expectations more regarding the process. So as long as the process is transparent and is fair, and free from corruption, this is what the EU is expecting. And it's important to also remember that Ukraine is one of the largest beneficiaries of foreign aid from the EU. And of course, that foreign aid has conditionalities, and definitely fight against corruption is one of them. Both the President of the European Council and the European Commission really will encourage and are encouraging Zelensky and the presidential administration and the government to continue to step up their efforts to reduce corruption, to carry out a judicial reform in order to have an independent judiciary, and also an economic reform. So to continue on this path to really, truly systemically reform the country. And one last note, what has emerged also from the summit is that Ukraine is really closely looking at the media pluralism in Ukraine, because obviously the media play a very big role in local elections, in national elections, and as well as more generally in European elections. So having that media pluralism, having independent media, and having for candidates to have equal access to media plays a very big role in also in this transparent process, which are the elections. So I'm just going to end on this note, saying that rather yes, then focusing on the results of the elections, I think that the EU will be much more interested in the standards under which these elections are being held, and that they're really respecting the transparency and the fairness and the will of the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for putting us in context. I think this is brilliant for the beginning, for start. I immediately have a lot of follow-up questions to ask, but as I promised, I will hold myself back until Q&A session so that we can tackle the questions comprehensively. With this, I would like to pass the floor to our next speaker, who is Vita Dumanska, presently CEO of NGO Chesno, and she's going to talk to us about the risks and opportunities that the newly adopted legislation carries. Vita, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I was planning to talk more about opportunities, but when I summarize all the results, I think it would be more about risks of new electoral legislation. First of all, this election, as Anya said, will be conducted within coronavirus. From one part, from other part we have conflict with Russia, and from the third part we have decentralization reform, which was done really in rush and not completed very well. But if you're talking about electoral code, one of the biggest achievements is introduction of the proportional system with the open list for the local council members. In the city there are over 10,000 voters live. As well, the code provides regulation for broader inclusion of women, internally displaced persons, and labor migrants. The civil society was demanding election reform and introduction of proportional system with open list. We all remember like those street actions. We all remember advocacy efforts at the parliament. So lawmakers supported this, but they introduced an electoral quota at 25%. At the same time, they introduced a complicated design of the ballot. This combination make actually open list similar to the closed list. So we get what we demanded, but the mechanism as it's formulated now, it's not so good. Also, the code now includes the concept of a minimum number of candidates whom parties should nominate on the regional list. So it's 5 candidates for each district plus 1 leader of the list. Actually, this should stimulate party building process. But now this became a significant problem for the parties in a small community, especially since it's really hard to find the candidates. So Ukrainian party system was not ready for such kind of innovation. As well, the court practice proves that this innovation can be bypassed, because the regulation is mandatory at the moment of nominating candidates rather than at the time of their registration. So it means that you have to have this minimum amount of the candidates when you're nominating them at the party meeting, but at the territorial commission, you can submit less people. The same situation is the gender quota. We were celebrating this as a victory, but the practice show they are also mandatory only at the moment of nomination. So Chesno has recorded cases when party included people on the list, but they failed to submit papers to the territorial electoral commissions. But commissions still register such a list because according to the electoral code, they comply with the rule to have this gender quota at the moment of nomination. So here is the space for violation which some party used during and the court prove that practices. Also, I would like to talk about finance issue at the local election. The campaign is actually unlimited. What does it mean? There are no limit on spending. So if we had some limit at parliamentary campaign, but we do not have at the local elections. In terms of regulating of campaign expenses, there are huge differences with the norms provided in the code electoral code and the law on political parties. So they have radically opposite approach. For example, code bans legal entities from funding campaigns and introduce limits to private individuals, like in the amount of 50,000 hryvnias to support political party. That's why parties use the regulation in the law on political parties to collect funds to their account, and they finance the election fund. So in this case, candidate parties and independent or self-nominated candidates are in really unequal condition. And also we have the situation that due to coronavirus, National Agency of Corruption Prevention, who is responsible for getting the party financial reports, postponed submission of the reports till the end of quarantine. But as quarantine is still on the process, we do not see financial report even for the first quarter. It means that Ukrainian voters will definitely not know who is supporting a political party before local election. So all the efforts are making towards increasing transparency of campaign finance, they're in this situation, they are not successful. Another aspect I would like to pay your attention is a really short campaigning period. So today, less than 20 days left until the election, but only today the party list from candidates in Kyiv were published on the website of Central Election Commission. So it's not only not enough time to regular voters to get all the information about party and about the candidate, but it also not enough not enough time to technically do all these procedures. As well, so national advertising campaigns started back in early July. Why? According to the election code, it's supposed to start on September 25th. So according to Chesno estimation, political parties have already spent more than $2.5 million on Facebook as a pre-term agitation. So actually campaign, agitational campaign is much longer than official, and nobody is following the rules introduced in the electoral code. And one more point I would like to pay your attention is the risk to change, attempts to change the rules of game during the campaign itself. Last week, Parliament had an idea to adopt one law which has a lot of good norms about and explanation about ballot, about provision, some measures due to COVID risks, but as well they tried to introduce a cancellation of state control over campaign finance at all. So that law was not adopted, but still there are risks. They are trying to change the important norms even during the campaign period. So the new election system will be tested during the local election before the future parliamentary election. So we have to learn all the bugs and find out how to solve it, as there is high probability of pre-term parliamentary election. It means that we should start to improve electoral legislation just after local election to be ready before parliament. So that's everything from my side, about opportunities and risks in new legislation. We'll be happy to answer later your questions.
Thank you so much, Vita. I think your speech has brilliantly showed us that devil is in the details, as always. And I also thank you that you managed to squeeze in actually your extensive research and analysis into point to point and very succinct, very short presentation. So Thank you a lot. And with this, from outsiders, we are transitioning to the insiders, so people working in the parliament, for the parliament, and actually actively contributing to developing and then implementing the changes. And also we are moving from women to men. So I also ask you to mark that here we have a very balanced panel in gender terms. With this, before passing the floor, I also want to make one more remark. I've noticed that our Zoom participants started turning off their cameras, their videos. So if you are with us and if you're actively listening, we would want not only know that you are there, but also to see you. And probably when we move closer to the end of the event, so that when you pose your question, we also know who you are and yeah, see your faces. So create an impression of a truly live event and not a virtual one as we have. Thank you so very much. I already see some cameras being turned on again. And with this, I pass the floor to Ostap Hunkevich, who is the lawyer assistant to one of the members of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine from the Holos Party. And he is going to talk to us about the recent history of the legislative changes on electoral law. Ostap, floor is yours.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much for this opportunity. As Marina already told, I'm an assistant of Member of Parliament Roman Luzinski from the oppositional party Holos, and I would like to stress several moments of what was the internal process of adopting those amendments, especially in July, and how it looked from our point of view. So, to formulate the leitmotif of these amendments in one phrase, I would say that the ruling party used the necessity to fix some defects of the electoral code just to justify its politically motivated manipulations. And now in detail. So new progressive electoral code of Ukraine was adopted by the previous parliament at the end of its term last year. Then it was vetoed by President Zelensky. And finally, it was adopted upon the inclusion of some of his proposals in December last year. But still, the text was a kind of result of a compromise, and there was general understanding that it had some defects and had to be amended. The draft of the amendments was presented by the Servant of People deputies in May. But very important point is that before that, in spring, during the quarantine, there were a number of discussions on what these amendments should include. And there was a number of statements on the part of the leaders of the Servant of People party on what these amendments would include. And for example, they threatened to introduce a 5% national barrier for local elections. So what it meant, that in order to get some places in local council, a party should overcome a 5% barrier, but in national scale. And it would totally distort the logic of local governance. And fortunately, those amendments were not proposed in May. But there were a number of other quite negative from our point of view amendments which were proposed in May and finally adopted in July. Why negative? Because they violate a number of international standards, and due to the limited time, I will stress only two of these violated international standards. The first of them is the right of everyone to run in local elections independently. So by reducing the threshold of application of proportional electoral system from 90,000 voters to 10,000 voters, the monomajority limited the opportunity for independent candidates to self-nominate only to small local communities up to 10,000 voters. And as of now, these communities where this self-nomination is possible is no more than, as far as I remember, 8 million Ukrainians. So in all other bigger communities, only parties can nominate its candidates. And as to statistics, more than a half candidates that were already nominated were nominated by either old parties or by the ruling party. So, of course, these changes were aimed by words of their authors at some political structuring of political life. But still, it limited an opportunity to local elites. And furthermore, it limited the opportunity of young new parties to get ready to a new election and find enough people and create enough infrastructure for participating in these elections appropriately. The second innovation in this, the second innovation aimed at the increasing of the role of parties was its additional ability to recall a deputy. So the deputy now can be recalled by its party and on its initiative if, for example, his activity does not respond to the program of the party. And it can create a room for manipulation, and it will subvert the independence of local deputies. Of course, it can be argued that new progressive parties such as Holos, Solidarity, and others, for example, that they can create that they have to build their own political infrastructure, and they can just offer those new young or independent candidates to use their parties for being nominated. But it is almost unbearable task now. It was almost unbearable task now, since the other fundamental electoral principle was violated, and this second principle was the principle of stability of electoral legislation. So the Code of Good Practices in Electoral Matters of the Venice Commission does not allow changes in the basic provisions of electoral legislation less than 1 year before the election. The purpose of this law, the purpose of this norm is equal opportunities for all parties, since if the ruling team understands well what to prepare for, it has better chances than, for example, some non-governmental forces. And that was the case this time. So small and young parties without appropriate infrastructure were not ready to build necessary capacity for participating in these elections appropriately. And probably one of the most bright examples of ungrounded and unpredicted change of the law and of neglecting of this principle of stability was first introduction in July, and then cancellation of candidates' obligation to submit a reference of their criminal record. So a lot of candidates have already paid for these references, which was finally in vain, because on the first day of the registration process, the obligation to submit those references was cancelled, as I already told, and the rules were changed again. And finally, till last week, the representatives of monomajority tried to push new amendments of the electoral legislation again. And these initiatives, the previous speaker already told about that, but these initiatives, they were again justified by the need to make some technical amendments or to prepare electoral system of Ukraine for elections in conditions of pandemics. But still some political manipulations were included in this draft laws. The first one was already mentioned, initiative to cancel the monitoring of party finances. And the second one was to empower the Central Electoral Committee to conduct a quasi-plebiscite on the day of the election. And the last initiative could be used by the government, by the ruling team, for example, for legitimizing some unpopular or some popular decision, but policy decisions, but would be never supported by civil society and experts. Fortunately, these attempts have failed, but at the same time, those necessary technical amendments were not adopted. To sum up, I would like to repeat my first statement that instead of amending only what was necessary, for instance, reducing electoral deposit, which was fortunately done, or introducing a new form of bulletin, still it is not perfect, but it was improved in July. The monomajority decided to improve its political positions, and exactly this motive and not the development of local governance, in my opinion, dominated. So thank you for the attention, and I'm ready to answer questions.
Ostapa, thank you very much for your passionate presentation. I feel that now Serhiy Horovenko, who is our next and last speaker, will have a difficult task to probably rebut or discuss all the points mentioned before. But since Serhiy is the representative of, he's also an assistant to one of the members of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, but from Servant of the People Party. Well, will we hear from you a positive tone or a positive approach to this electoral legislation? I'm really curious. So floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Sure, you will hear only positive aspects of this last legislation amendments. And like, despite on that, I represent the Servant of People, like more like a coalition. Let's to say today I will be I will be in opposite to all of the previous speakers because I need to express some positive amendments that was adopted by the Verkhovna Rada in the last year. So before I start my speech, I just want to say that I totally agree that it's incorrectly and it's like a violation of the code of good practice in electoral matters that the Verkhovna Rada adopted some amendments not less than 1 year before the election time. So it's not discussable thing. It's everyone is agreed on it, and it's like, of course, it's bad practice. Nevertheless, the previous code that was adopted by previous Verkhovna Rada was not really workable, and it cannot be used on this election. So it should be adopted by the new parliament, and the problem is in the way it was done. But the situation was, how to say, without any alternatives. I just want to divide all of amendments that was passed by parliament into different groups. First of it, it's like a technical amendment. So as I understand, no one discussed that it was needed. It was like mandatory. It was like constitutional obligation by the Verkhovna Rada to present the legislation that was really worked on practice, and there is no any doubt. Does it need or not? It was needed by everyone, and people waited for it. Second part of amendments, it's like a political amendments. So in that way, we should discuss does they really needed in that elections period, or it should be presented to the next election period in few years. So I just want to explain and try to express the logic in which it was adopted. So the most discussable amendment, it was about this differences between proportional and majorital election system. So whereas only party could nominate the candidates for local elections, or it should be it can be self-nomination by some activists on local hromadas. I just want to remember all of our guests and participants that the idea of reform of decentralization was to equalize all hromadas, despite on does it like city or villages, every every community should be equal in their rights, and this is the main idea and this core principle of the decentralization reform. Nevertheless, previous regulation, as a stop set in 90 voters to divide in different system, was that if it's city, nobody cares about how many voters you have. Even I just want to say that the smallest city in Ukraine consists from 5,000 people. So it's really small city, but it should be in previous system. It could be a majoritarial system. Party should nominate all candidates. Nevertheless, if it's small villages, I just want to remember that the biggest village in Ukraine consists from 33,000 voters. So you can see that we have a really small city, and we have really big villages. And previous system was not regulated. It's very well, and it's not be at that way, because the reform of decentralization said that no one has some privileges. Everyone are equal in their rights, in their financial situation, and only on the local management depends how the gromadas will be developed. So the idea of this 10,000 voters divide the system was to equalize all gromadas, and concretely said that if it's less than 10,000, it doesn't matter, does it city or it's small villages, you just have proportional system. If it's more than 10,000 people, you should have a majoritarial system, and all candidates should be nominated by the party. And the finalist that I don't know, does it was it was calculated, but really we have already 1,468 gromadas, and 785 gromadas has less than 10,000 persons. So 55% of gromadas will have this proportional system. So majority of gromadas in Ukraine will not have this problem, if it's problem with this system. So majority of them will have the system that was conceived previously. Nevertheless, the idea was that we should to build real party, a real new party. And right now we have the situation that majority of party, except some two old big parties, have their local representatives only in the really big city. For example, every party has their main office in Kiev, and only 25 offices in only cities with cities centers of oblasts. So it's a real problem. And if we transfer all of power, all of money, all of finance to local gromadas, we also should create the system in which party will need it to be presented in all gromadas or in majority of gromadas, not be only on regional level. So that's why the parliament said that, okay, at that election period, we have more majority of gromadas will live in proportional election system, but still 45 gromadas with more people, more money, more opportunities need to have this majoritarial system, because it's it's discussable, but people plus minus and experts plus minus agreed that majoritarial system is a little bit better, because if there is no any corruption on local level, you cannot, for example, pay for just be active on your some local territory and do some corruption stuff to be elected. So the majoritarial system is better, and that's why it's really chance for new gromadas, for new administrative territorial dividing to live in the new conditions and to develop these conditions for future. Because I want to also say that if you remember, previous local election code or legislation was also adopted like few months before the election period in 2014 a year. So it's like, unfortunately, it's a really bad practice by political systems that we change the electional system like up to all elections, even local elections. So the idea of these amendments was to like create a ground for the system that will consist not only in that elections, but also will live in future. And like it was a, how to say, logical part of the decentralization reform that should create the ecosystem for the party to build their institutional capacity and to have new branches in majority, even in half of gromadas in Ukraine. And also, I would like to say that Ostap mentioned that it's like a problem for local activists. They need to be under some parties, but the idea also is that it's not. No one just said that you should go to some bad parties or some parties that you will never been like in past. You can also decide maybe you want to be a part of some new parties that have only its branch in Kyiv, but you can like start be a part of this party and develop this party offices in your local gromadas. And it's like my idea is that perfect chance for new parties that are not corruptional, that are really positive, etc., etc., to be not to finish their development in Kyiv or, for example, some big cities, but also try to be really try to build their infrastructure in gromadas. And it's really big chance for it. And as I checked on the site of CVK, it's like, for example, some new parties that was like created like approximately 1 year ago, like nominated more than 300 candidates. So it means that this party already found 3,000 members, and it's great for them to be presented in a lot gromadas and not be only in Kyiv, Lviv, Kharkiv, and Odessa. Also, okay, I agree that it's maybe not the best. It's not the best policy that was adopted, but it also has not only political ground, the decision, but also the decision has some logical argumentation that should be, how to say, understood by audience, but because it's not only because servant of people wanted to have more opportunities to be elected in local levels, but it also a really logic part of the decentralization reforms that was the concept of which was adopted 5 years ago, and it was a part of it. And moreover, it's a great chance for new parties, new not corruptional like perfect parties that every one of us likes, really likes, really have their infrastructure in local cities. And the problem is also that local activists or some even in Kyiv, they just like, how to say, has different opinions, political opinions, etc. And it's great chance for new parties to catch these people to their parts and to work with them. Like, I want just finish that, say that if you know, for example, that alternatives ideas, for example, previous ideas was how to say, was based not on economical ground. It was based on some political ground, because this how to say, this line, like, in which you will have even proportional or majoritarical electoral system, grounded on the number of 90,000 voters. Why? Because the Uzhgorod, as the smallest oblast center was has 81,000 voters. So it's not economical ground. It's ground of status that was nominated in the USSR period. So there is no any there is logic, but the logic based not on economical background, but based on some political will of USSR some peoples. And
we want to give you some breathing space because we think that you've now did your best, like you're a real fighter, and you stood to your promise in defending the recent changes. But as I said, we want to give you some breathing space, and we also want to give an opportunity to our speakers to react and to our participants to pose their questions. So we thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and we have not 20 but 10 minutes left, so we really will have to speed up a bit. Okay. In my chat, I have 4 questions, and I would like to proceed in the following way. Support group, if you hear me, please be prepared to give floor to Dmytro Shkurko, to Ilona Sologub, and to Martina Urbinati to pose their questions if they can switch on their microphones and cameras in the following order, as I said. And from our first participant who posed his question, I will just read it. This participant, unfortunately, I don't know the surname, but the name is Andrew. And Andrew is asking whether EU is relying on whether Ukraine, is relying on best EU practices in introducing the changes into legislation. So that has Ukraine taken anything, any experience, or any tips, any inspiration from EU countries' legislation? And this question is to all the speakers. So if there is anybody willing to comment, please just switch on your microphone. Thank you.
You see, probably that's like a simple question, but really tough question. And it's better if guys from like MP assistants will answer. But from our perspective, we are trying to use like good example in terms of party finance. We're trying to adopt them, but still there is I don't know good words for that. Like Ukrainian reality interrupts, some kind of interest interrupt, and all the good ideas are failed, more or less. Some stuff is progressive, some not. According to proportional system in different European countries, it worked differently. There are a lot of types, and for Ukrainian reality was taken that one which was discussed like a couple of years. So that's from my perspective.
So as I understand, we cannot pinpoint any particular member state or any few states. The ideas were taken by bits and pieces, but then probably dismantled in the process. Quick yes or no from any other speaker to this question? Very brief response.
Just briefly, and I cannot say that it really corresponds to the EU experience, but when argumenting these amendments, the servant of people told that the introduction of electronic voting is a European practice and so on. But as far as I know, a lot of European countries already refused from that. But still, one of the arguments was exactly this.
Yeah, I think in terms of electoral legislation, we have to be very careful about European practice because it's up to the member states to decide what legislation they have on their national levels and of course their regional or local levels. So here, yeah, there is no like magic or standard and it really depends. Thank you so much. So we are moving further. If we are ready to give the floor to Pan Dmytro Shkurko from National News Agency of Ukraine, let's do that.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
My name is Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine, and I'm working in Brussels like a staff correspondent for my agency. I observed European elections recently, and I can say that the picture which Vita Domanska just draw is just quite scary. Just because we see that the electoral law is not effective, nobody follows the rules, and because of COVID, there is no financial control. But by any circumstances, this is exactly the conditions for local powers and oligarchs to manipulate these votes and voters. I just want to know if my reflection is correct. And follow up, if they are speaking about the absence of the control or the party spendings, this is a quite dangerous thing, because overall it could be like, the source for money laundering. If somebody wants to put the money in good hands and after just to have a profit from the local power decisions, it's just a way. In that regard, my question concerning the reaction of the state and state fiscal authorities on that situation. Just because, the COVID itself, it could not be excused if we suspect some kind of crime activity. Thank you.
Thank you. I will just quickly add that this question was primarily directed to Pani Vita Domanska, but again, if any other speakers would want to add after her, please do so. Pani Vita.
Okay. I would like to assure the situation is not so scary. Yes, we have some kind of problem, but problem which I found that it's they are related to the equality of the participants of the electoral campaign, because there are like different regulations for self-nominated candidates and party candidates. If we are talking about mayors, and self-nominated candidates, it's in much worse condition, and it's hard for them to collect electoral fund, and they have to publicize their donor information. All this issue with the financial transparency, so we thought that transparency has to be a factor of electoral choice, but now it doesn't work like that. And if you're asking about COVID and how it influenced on submission of a financial report. Unfortunately, now parties are not violating any law, because the National Agency of Corruption Prevention agreed that the report should be submitted after quarantine. Probably then they made this decision. They were not expecting the quarantine will be such a long period. They decided that in early spring. So regarding fiscal authorities are not responsible for control of party financial report. The agency is only responsible organization. But now they can do nothing while they do not have reports. So that's one issue. The second issue, if you're observing elections, you remember a lot of scandals with the fake donors during presidential and parliamentary campaign. I mean that people in name of which donation to the party financial account were made. From our experience, for example, we just make an announcement that Kernes party in Kharkiv region started to fundraise, and national agency, because they submitted report, we saw that information about their donors. National agency checked that donors, and they understood that the people have no financial capacity to make a donation, and now they have some criminal procedures over that case. So I think that violations are there, but they are still hidden while we do not see financial reports. And coming back to your first part of the question about oligarch, I don't see that. First, we have to understand campaign is really expensive, and also we have to people have to know that local councillors are not receiving any compensation compensation for working in local councils. It means that they are using a lot of resources for bribery, for bucket giving, for other stuff. It's like they are buying ticket to the local budget. And yes, oligarch finance campaign, we don't have like direct proofs, but it worked on practice like that.
Thank you so much. I think your reply was pretty much exhaustive. So if there is no willingness from other speakers to comment on this particular question, I would want to give a floor to Pani Ilona Sologub with her questions to Pan Serhiy and Pan Ostap, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming and thanks to all the speakers for presenting. My question is to Serhiy and Ostap. Can you please tell us how your parties recruit local activists or maybe just some good people to run for local elections on behalf of your parties? What is, so to say, informal contract between you and this person, or maybe there is a formal contract? What are the mutual obligations between you and the parties and the activists?
Yeah, Ostapa, would you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. Okay, so I was not directly engaged in the process of selecting candidates for our party, but as far as I know, there were two sets of criteria. The first one was formal, and I know exactly what criteria was on the case of Kyiv City Council. So the first set of criteria was not to have any. The first set was quite formal, so not to have any connections to Yanukovych regime. The second one was not to have any corruption, any suspicion in corruption. The third one was not to have any conflict of interest with other deputies or with other parties. And the second set was like more conceptual, so it included 4 criteria. The first one was to be a patriot. The second one, again, zero tolerance to corruption. The third one was competence or professionalism, and the fourth one was like such personal trait as resolution, commitment to the ideals of Holos.
Thank you, Serhiy.
Like, it was perfect presentation by Ostap. I don't know what to add. It's a perfect, like, it's a list of criteria. I don't really know the list of criteria at our party, but I can see on the representatives of party to Kyiv City Council that it's plus minus the same. But I would just want to say that I know, like, how to say, I know that like as like informal agreement consists that 10% of decision you should vote for as a party set, and 90%, or you can do whatever you want, but it should be also pro-Ukrainian stuff. It should be proactive. You should be proactive, etc., etc. So the idea is that some decisions and some votings you should be with the party line, but the majority of your time you are free to do whatever you want in respect to like your own political understanding of the situation and some, how to say, wishes that you give to people that votes for you.
Thank you so much. It's interesting to observe that there are questions where a servant of the ruling majority, a servant of the People Party, and then the opposition parties converge in the way they approach selection of the candidates. Thank you very much. Last question for today, but not least, comes from Martina Urbinati. So I understand that Martina is actually a foreigner, and this is doubly or triply important for us that these questions are being followed by not only by Ukrainians, not only by here people working in Brussels, but also foreigners working on these issues. So Martina, your floor is yours.
Thank you very much to the speakers, and I'm just briefly introducing myself. I'm a MA postgraduate student in political science, and I've been doing research on electoral participation of internally displaced persons in Ukraine. And of course, I've been following all the decentralization process and the recent updates of the electoral code. My question, I understand, might be a little bit more for civil society, but in some cases you are also familiar with this issue. So the new electoral code will allow people who do not live as their official registration address or propiska, will allow them to permanently change their electoral address. And I was wondering how this system has been implemented so far, because from the state voter registry, a lot of people from non-governmental control areas of Luhansk and Donbass, I see they actually benefited from this mechanism. And I wanted to know how the clerks were actually trained, if they knew the mechanism, if they constantly applied it, and if it was well managed. And also the question about what about the people who do not have an electoral address at all? Are they going to be taken into consideration? Is going to be there a mechanism for them to access to the polls and exercise their voting right in the next local elections? Thank you.
Thank you.
I can ask, like, first part of the question. So more than 100,000 people changed their electoral address. That was good, but even me I was expecting that in Kyiv more people will change the address. Almost all people change it through their internet cabinet, so there was no necessity to go to the any like bodies to make a written statement or something like that. That was done pretty well. It took, like, for my colleagues, it took like 6 to 10 minutes to change everything. And that was like pretty good procedures. Unfortunately, I do not have any statistic about those who hadn't Ukrainian passport, like young people, and I can't say anything about that. Maybe guys can help.
Yeah, I can add about that. You probably meant internally displaced persons, who young people from temporarily occupied territories. Yeah, as far as I know, the only way for them to vote is to register in a special center for homeless, and this is the only way for you to get a registration address, and then you can choose whatever electoral address you want.
Thank you. Any other responses? Thank you. We hope that these two answers were also comprehensive and conclusive enough. And with this, I would actually want to thank all the speakers, all the participants, and tell that actually even the type of questions and whom they were coming from are very, very telling, that the interest in Ukrainian elections, local election, goes beyond Ukraine. And this is why this event was done intentionally in English, to avail those non-Ukrainians follow our debates, follow Ukrainian developments and all the novelties in the legislation, and to again better comprehend what we are to expect. Also, the nature of questions brightly shows us that there are questions beyond just candidates and parties and representations and who managed to improve their stance or not, but it goes to actually the voters themselves, the system itself, and therefore I think that it will be very crucial to gather together again online after the elections for a sum up and for to make an assessment of how did elections go and who actually was the winner and who was the loser, not in terms of gaining the seat in the administrations, but actually like looking whether system has been more conducive for voters, but also for candidates to make the process free and fair, as Anna Nalevaiko told us in the very beginning. So on this note, I thank everybody for your active participation, and I encourage you to stay tuned to follow Promote Ukraine and Vox Ukraine, as we are following local elections in Ukraine and many other topics, and we would be delighted to see you again on our online or offline events. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.